Welcome back, Algebra 1. This is lesson 95. We're going to be doing nonlinear graphs. First of all, let's just dissect that word nonlinear and understand that what we're doing is we're graphing things that are not lines. Okay, so these are going to be curved graphs, or they're going to look like a V. The first one we're going to focus in on is called a parabola. Okay, a parabola is for a quadratic equation. So just to remind you what a quadratic equation looks like, it is when we have x squared as our highest exponent that we're dealing with. We might have more than just y equals x squared. We can have some numbers after that, but understand that x squared is the largest exponent that we would have in order to graph it. Okay, so a parabola looks like a smiley face or a frown. The difference that you're going to notice, whether it opens up or whether it opens down, is based off of the coefficient in front of the x squared. Okay, so if it is a positive coefficient, y equals 4x squared, and that's a positive 4, it is going to be smiling. And if it's a negative coefficient, y equals negative 4x squared, that is going to frown when it has a negative in front of the x squared. Okay, so that is one type of nonlinear function that you're going to be looking at today. There are some different forms for this parabola. So Saxon is just wanting to introduce you to parabolas, and he's showing you that there are several different ways we can write that equation. All of them have an x squared at some point, whether it's in the equation or it is there after foiling. But just so you are introduced to this, okay? So we're going to focus in on this little section here in the middle, star 1, that asks you to match the function with the correct graph. And this is a little bit challenging if you've never had parabolas before. So I'm going to walk you through this. The first thing I'm going to look at is, of all of my pictures, I see one of them is frowning. So I'm going to find the equation that has a negative out in front of the x squared. Okay, first of all, equation A doesn't have a negative, equation C doesn't have a negative, and B and D are a little different. We would actually have to FOIL them out to get the x squared, but where I see that negative is over here on equation D. Okay, so D is going to be the one equation that is frowning. So I'm going to go ahead and put D here and cross that off as an option. Then the next thing I'm going to focus on is when I see it FOILed out as I do on equation B. We've just started learning about this, how you would be able to set those equal to 0 using the zero product property and solve for your x values. So if I did that, if I said x minus 6 equals 0 and x plus 8 equals 0, it's going to give me some good information about this graph. I go ahead and add the 6 over, I get x equals positive 6, x equals negative 8. So what I need to do is look on my x-axis, the horizontal axis, and figure out when I have a parabola crossing at x equals 6 and x equals negative 8. So that means the parabola is going to have part of it crossing on the left side and part of it on the right side. So let me help you out here. Here is an example where we have solutions that we have one negative x value and we have one positive x value. So this is my only option that fits in the description for letter B. I'm going to go ahead and I assign that value and cross off B as an option. Okay, now we've narrowed down to A and C and our answers for 1 and 3. So I'm going to focus in on question C right now. It is written in a special way. It's called vertex form. And it's mentioned up above on the right side what vertex form is. Basically, it gives you an x value and a y value. Okay, the x value is the opposite, though, of whatever we see. So it has a negative 6 present, but we're going to make that positive 6. and the y value is a positive 8. So as an ordered pair, that would be 6, 8. The vertex form tells me where my vertex is. That's the kind of the point of the smiley face, the highest or lowest point on the smile or frown. So where is 6, 8? Well, in question 1, this could be a 6, 8. But let me just double check where 3 hits. The vertex on 3 actually would be a negative y value. So that one would not work. So the only way I could have a vertex of 6, 8 is with question 1. So I'm going to go ahead and label that C, take that off my options, and then guess what? That means number 3 has to match up with letter A. Okay, so that was just to give you some introductory exposure to parabola. The next type of function, if we scroll on down, is called a cubic function. Okay, a cubic is when we have x raised to the 3rd power. So up above we were doing x squared. A cubic is something like y equals x cubed. The graph that you see here in blue is a pretty standard cubic function. It's just been shifted a little bit, but it is going the correct direction. So what I mean by that is this is a positive x cubed graph. All right, now if I just zoom in on these two graphs, I want you to see that this first one that is blue is the positive x cubed graph. And then the one that is the yellow-orange color, this would be a negative. It's going the opposite direction. It falls from the left to the right. So a positive x cubed is going to rise. Think of it as a positive slope. And then the orange-colored graph is a negative x cubed, so it looks like it is falling. Then the next type of graph I want you to focus in on is called the square root function. I don't know if you're an anime fan, but I have always referred to these square root functions as the eyebrow graph. They make me think of kind of an anime eyebrow. There's only one eyebrow though, so we're just going to go with that. The square root function, standard way of graphing it, if it's just square root of x, it is this graph right here on the pink coloring. Okay, it starts at 0, 0, and it shoots its eyebrow off to the side. And by the way, that eyebrow goes on forever. Okay, but that can be shifted around, as you can see on some of these graphs. The green graph showing you what happens if we tweak a little bit underneath the square root or outside the square root. We're shifting it. And then what would happen if we made it a negative square root, etc. So it is going to still be an eyebrow. It just might be shifted around, and it can be flipped around as well. That, again, is the square root graph. The next one I'm going to have you focus on this front page is the absolute value graph. This one tends to be a pretty easy one for students to remember because it has a V built into the graph, V for value. So absolute value is a hard V graph. It's not like the U graph of the parabola. And then again, this is a standard absolute value graph. It hasn't been shifted here that I just highlighted in yellow. It starts at 0, 0, and then it has a slope of 1 going both left and right. Okay, I hope you find that to be a good introduction. Now I'm going to give you, don't get too scared, but the next page has a ton of graphs for you to go back and reference later, especially if some questions come up, say on Delta Math or on a future quiz or test, that you're able to take a look and say, okay, that's what the cubic graph was. That was kind of the S graph. We aren't going to get into any of those trig graphs down at the bottom. Okay, so we won't really be doing anything with those right now. They're just part of that reference table. And then it looks like we're ready for some ABC questions out of your textbook so you can have an idea of exactly what Saxon is expecting from all of this introductory material. So we're going to be on page 399 looking at practice ABC questions at the bottom of that page. And what Saxon does is he gives you a very simple illustration. Let me just zoom in on ABC questions. For number 1, he says, here's my graph. Okay, number 2, here's my graph. Number 3, here's my graph. And number 4 looks like this. And then he says, write down which function, f, g, h, or k, matches that graph based off what we just learned about those functions. So looking in my book for those functions that are available, the first one that's provided, f of x, is equal to x squared plus 2. I'm going to key in on the fact that it says x squared. That is my highest exponent. So this is the first one we discussed. It's the parabola. And that means it's going to be this smiley or frowny graph. So I'm going to put down here on number 4 that this is the f function. And I'll go ahead and write out what it was provided in the book. The next one that's provided is g of x is equal to negative absolute value x minus 1. Key thing that we're focused on is there's an absolute value in the middle of this function. The absolute value, remember, is v, so it's the v graph. It happens to be flipped upside down, but it is still a v for value. So the g function is going to go with number 3. Negative absolute value, that's why it got flipped upside down. All right, so we have 2 more to go, h and k. The h function is h of x equals x cubed plus 1. X cubed is what we called a cubic function, and it was the one that kind of looked like an S. So that one is going to go with number 2. Excuse me. H of x equals x cubed plus 1. And then the final function, k, is a square root. So there you see that nice little eyebrow from the anime. We have k of x equals the square root of x. All right, so that's question A, matching each of the graphs that were given with the function. Let's go to B. It's going to be very similar. Let's just sketch real fast what the graphs look like. Nothing fancy, just a quick sketch. The first one has a frown. Number 2 has an eyebrow. Number 3 has a V. And number 4 has the snake S graph, possibly going the downhill slope though. All right, and then taking a look at the function options in your book. This is on the page 399 at the very bottom. The first one is f function is equal to square root of x, or excuse me, absolute value of x. Absolute value of x, so that should be a v graph. That means the f function should go right here with that v. All right, the next one is g function. It has a negative x cubed plus 1. A cubic graph is that snake S graph. So this one is going to be number 4. G of x, g function, is equal to negative x cubed plus 1. All right, and then we have h function. H is the square root of x, and the square root is our eyebrow graph. So I'm going to put that next to number 2. H function equals square root x. The last one's going to go with number 1 is k function, and it is a parabola. If we did FOIL it out, you would see that it has a negative x squared. Okay, it's a little tricky the way it's written because it's before foiling. All right. And then this is going to be something that you'll work on Delta Math to do some of the homework questions. All right, good luck.